A migrant whose whiteness marked his or her fungibility, their capacity to be bought and sold, rather than their rights as a political subject.
You hear that?
A white racial grammar emerged conspicuously in the 1680s in reference to one group, indentured servants. They're the only people described as white. Especially those transported to the New World as felons.
And what I found in the course of my research is there was a persistent demonization of poor white people. In other words, in many eras in white society, if you were poor, it was tantamount to being a criminal. And that criminalization was then a connotation for making you a slave. And this slavery, by the way, this villanage, even was hereditary. In the chronicles that I read and in the accounts that I read, there was a almost biological taint on children of parents who had been white slaves or villains. So to summarize, I would say that the enslavement of whites, far from being a very brief period in the annals of time, was in fact the universal experience of whites. So now we come to the modern period, and we have this absurd stereotype which denotes black skin with servitude. And it's absurd. It's a folly. So I'm bringing the good news to black people that they are not of any more of a slave race than whites have been. They'll say, well, you can't compare white bondage to black slavery because the whites didn't do very difficult work and the enslavement was all over with within 7 years. No way. There were many loopholes and abuses of that law. As you and I know, there can be a law on a piece of paper. That doesn't mean that that's what's lived.
Wow. Hey, what's up, everybody? Thanks for tuning in once again. Much love and respect to everybody that's out there listening in right now. Gonna be a quick video today. Just want to go over something that I've been wanting to do a video about, and I just keep forgetting. So shout out to Little Lady for the reminder. Had a great conversation with her today. Got to meet her today and talk to her. Thanks for the reminder. Send me a screenshot of it, and I was like, oh yeah, I got that. So let me do a video about it before I forget again. But I think it's something very important to remind everybody, and even to myself, you know, especially when it comes to genealogy and when we're talking about classification of people in colonial times especially. And today we're talking about so-called white, or the tag with term white as a status, not as complexion. All right, so we're in this next book, and I just want to show you that this is more than just, you know, people writing little articles here and there. This is actual history that they left out of our educational system. We're talking about indentured servitude, and we're talking about white servants, white slavery. All right, so this is the Johns Hopkins University Studies in Historical and Political Science by Herbert B. Adams, the editor. It says history is past politics and politics are present history. Freeman. 13th series. All right, and it's called White Servitude in Virginia. Yes, White Servitude in Virginia. A study of the system of indentured labor in the American colonies by James Curtis Bala. All right, White Servitude in the colony of Virginia. The colonists were marched to their daily work in squads and companies under officers. These are white people, colonists, Europeans, not talking about African slaves here. All right, and the severest penalties were prescribed for a breach of discipline or neglect of duty. A persistent neglect of labor was to be punished by galley service from 1 to 3 years. Penal servitude was also instituted for petty offenses. They worked as slaves in irons for a term of years, in irons and chains, All right, we're talking about white people, not Africans, not black people. We're talking about white Europeans being put in irons for a term of years. The planters affirmed that there were continual whippings and extraordinary punishments, such as hangings. Who's getting hanged first? You see, who's getting whipped? Hanged. All right, shooting, breaking on the wheel, and even burning alive. They were burning these people alive, but it is likely they must exaggerate the state of affairs. But they were sending so many people here, even before 1619. Since 1607, they were trying to set this up. Right now, we're in the Black's Law Dictionary. It says here definitions of the terms and phrases of American and English jurisprudence, ancient and modern, by Henry Campbell Black, M.A., author of treatises on judgments, tax titles, intoxicating liquors, bankruptcy, mortgages, constitutional law, interpretation of laws, rescission and cancellation of contracts, etc. This is the revised 4th edition, okay? In 1968 is when they made this. And I'm on page 792. We got a definition here for free white persons, and I want you guys to pay close attention to what it's going to tell you. This is who they were talking about when they were talking about white. Free white persons, referred to in Naturalization Act as amended by Act of July 14th, 1870, has meaning naturally given, and it when first used in 1 Statute 103, C3, meaning all persons belonging to the European races, then commonly counted as white, any European, and their descendants, including such descendants in other countries to which they have emigrated. Now pay attention to the fine print right here. It says, it includes all European Jews, all of them, not just Ashkenazi Jews, all of them. Okay? Sephardic Jews as well, colored Jews, more or less intermixed with peoples of Celtic, Scandinavian, Teutonic, Iberian, Latin, Greek, and Slavic descent. It includes Magyars, Lapps, Finns, and the Basque and Albanians. It includes the mixed Latin, Celtic, Iberian, and Moorish inhabitants of Spain and Portugal. Again, what does white include? European Jews, all of them, all European Jews, and Moorish inhabitants of Spain and Portugal. Those are white. Free white, that's what you see, free white. Moorish inhabitants of Spain and Portugal. Now we know already Celtic, Slavic, a lot of these Basque, the Basque, got a future video, very dark skin complexion people. A lot of the language resembles the Algonquin, the Basque. We know a lot of these, the Finns, there was the white fair Finns and the dark skin Finns. So we know a lot of these Iberians, we know a lot of these are Swarty people as well, who are being called white, along with the Moorish inhabitants of Spain and Portugal. We already know so-called Negro people, again, being called free whites, okay? The mixed Greek, Latin, Phoenician, and North African inhabitants of Sicily, and the mixed Slav and Tartar inhabitants of South Russia. It does not mean Caucasian race. It does not mean Caucasian race, Aryan race, or Indo-European races, nor the mixed Indo-European, Dravidian, Semitic, Mongolian people who inhabit Persia. It does not mean Caucasian race. A Syrian of Asiatic birth and descent will not be entitled to become a naturalized citizen of the United States as being a free white person. So these are the different court cases. Again, it says nor a native born Filipino, nor a native of India who belonged to the Hindu race. Okay, all the court cases. Now we got another term here. I want to show you guys what it says. It says here, free woman of color. Are you ready? What's a free woman of color? In the Black's Law Dictionary, it says a term up to the time of the Civil War applied to all persons not of the white race A free woman of color is a person that's not from these people, right? That would include Moorish inhabitants of Spain and Portugal and European Jews, right? What does it include? It includes Indians, though, including Indians, free women of color, right? Applied to all persons who are not considered the white race, right? The white race, free white, right here, the white race, including Indians, free women of color, including Indians, free women of color, including Indians. Wake up and stop with your prejudices and your tags and generalizations. It's deeper than that. All right, free white persons, according to Black's Law's dictionary. All right.
Indeed, not a single English or American sailor or traveler captured at sea by North African pirates between 1600 and 1775 described himself or herself as a white slave, or even as white, in over 36 published memoirs. Instead, they described themselves as Christian captives, as Christian slaves, and frequently as English slaves. To be a white slave was to be a Muslim, and if born in Europe, to be someone who had converted to Islam, a so-called renegade. To be a white slave was to be a Muslim, and if born in Europe, to be someone who had converted to Islam. To be a white slave or a white servant in North America in the 1680s was likewise to be understood as a trafficked subject. To be a white slave or a white servant in North America in the 1680s was likewise to be understood as a trafficked subject.
Or brought into.
So let's see what it says in here. It says the invention of the white race, volume 1, racial oppression and social control. Again, very important. Social control. What's going on right now? You locked down, right? Social control, racial oppression and social control by Theodore W. Allen, introduction by Jeffrey B. Perry, a powerful and polemical study, Times Literary Supplement, all right? Of the first edition of the invention of the white race, were startled by Allen's bold assertion on the back cover. When the first Africans arrived in Virginia in 1619, there were no white people there. Again, when the first so-called Africans, right, we're going to dodge the hijack. We already know these so-called 20-odd Negroes were taken from a Spanish ship named the João Bautista, which the Portuguese had given to the Spaniards, right? It was supposed to be coming from Africa, supposedly, right? That's why they had supposed black people. But actually, when I checked the voyage of this ship, it never stopped in Africa, according to the recorded voyage. All right, it left Europe and arrived at the West Indian Islands, all right, the Caribbean. And from there, it was pirated by English, who took 20 of those people, all right, and brought them to, so they weren't coming from Africa. There's no proof of that. So we're going to dodge the hijack right there. But it's telling us that before any people of colors, what they mean, any people of color arrived in Virginia in 1619, there were no white people there. No white people, huh? Nor, according to the colonial records, would there be for another 60 years, all right? So they're letting you know that officially recorded, there is no mention of a so-called white person, the word white, for 60 years. That statement based on 20 plus years of research in Virginia's colonial records, all right? Do you understand that? Did you do the research? No white people mentioned, all right? No, the word white didn't exist there for 60 years ever, anywhere recorded in the beginning of Virginia's colony. Reflected the fact that Allen found no instance of the official use of the word white as a token of social status. It didn't mean anything. It wasn't a token of social status. Do you hear that? Prior to its appearance in Virginia law, passed in 1691, as he later explained, others living in the colony at that time were English. All right, now pay attention. They were what? English. They had been English when they left England, and naturally they and their Virginia-born children were English, right? They were not white. Listen to what they're saying. White identity had to be carefully taught, and it would be only after the passage of some 6 crucial decades, 60 years, right, that the word would appear as a synonym for European Americans, So, are these Europeans only pale-skinned? No, we already know that a lot of these Europeans were so-called Negro too. So they would be considered white as well if they're European Americans. You understand what they're saying? Yeah, the word white didn't exist. It wasn't about race. They were all English. You were an Englishman, you were a black Englishman or a white Englishman, it doesn't matter, you were English. The word white didn't exist. So we continue, says, it is in the context of such findings that he offers his major thesis. The white race was invented as a ruling class. It was invented as a ruling class. This was invented as a ruling class social control, formation, and responses to labor solidarity as manifested in the later Civil War stages of Bacon's rebellion in 1676 to 77. To this, he adds 2 important corollaries. The ruling elite, in its own class interest, deliberately instituted a system of racial privileges to define and maintain the white race. Again, the ruling elite. Who became the ruling elite? They had an agenda. All right? The ruling elite, in its own class interest, deliberately instituted a system of racial privileges to define and maintain the white race. It wasn't about complexion until they created this.
Now, why is this not being known more widely in America? Why is this being swept under the rug?
We have a gigantic industry in the United States and in the West which is determined to limit black people to a slave mentality, to tell them you've been slaves, and the only way you're ever going to get out of that is to rely on the slave mentality of the socialistic welfare democratic system, which is going to subsidize your manumission ever further. Well, as we know, no one ever gets out of his own bondage by someone else doing it for you. It's by your own work that you bring yourself out of bondage. Because certainly white slaves...